A derelict spacecraft, cocooned in cosmic webs, floats in silence. A man wakes from cryosleep, greeted not by salvation, but by a familiar face that feels too perfect to be real. A mechanical fox spirit leaps across the iron skyline of colonial Hong Kong. Her body is forged from steam and vengeance, and her prey, gentlemen in silk and steel, have no idea what's coming. Somewhere else, a bureaucrat screams as he's devoured by the very garbage he tried to erase. His limbs vanish into a mound of living waste, a grotesque echo of the civilization he once served. Episodes 7 to 10 of Love, Death, and Robots aren't just standalone stories. They're fragments of a shared nightmare, pieces of a deeper question we never wanted to ask. These shorts don't unfold like traditional narratives. They unspool like lucid dreams turning rotten, blending genres, cultures, and tones into one disorienting tapestry of the human condition. You think it's a sci-fi thriller in space, but it's actually a story about the need for illusions to keep us sane. You think it's folklore retold with gears and metal, but it's a cry against cultural erasure and the mechanization of identity. You think it's a joke about a trash monster, but it's a parable of our own waste turning against us. You think it's a war story, but it's a meditation on what it means to be used, feared, and discarded by a system you serve. These four stories seem disconnected on the surface, but they form a closed circuit. From a consciousness trapped in a lie, beyond the Aquila Rift, to a body stripped and rebuilt by empire, good hunting, to a life swallowed by the things we throw away, the dump, to a soul rejected for being different, shapeshifters. This is not an anthology. It's an existential journey disguised as animation. The real questions are not about what happens in these episodes, but why they were told this way. Why do we find comfort in illusion, even if it kills us? Can a body rebuilt by force still carry a soul? Is garbage the final monument of our civilization? And what does it mean to fight for a nation that doesn't see you as human? But here's the deepest mystery of all. Why do these shorts, barely 10 to 17 minutes long, deliver more philosophical weight than many full-length films? That's what we're about to unpack. Frame by frame, scene by scene, illusion by illusion, behind the curtain, where folklore, algorithms, and trauma collide. When Tim Miller and David Fincher launched Love, Death, and Robots, they weren't just producing an anthology, they were testing the boundaries of visual storytelling. With each episode helmed by a different studio, and often adapted from speculative fiction's most haunting minds, the series was designed to be volatile, experimental, and unafraid to offend or unsettle. But episodes 7 through 10 mark a tonal pivot, away from the ironic or absurd, and toward the philosophical, the political, and the deeply personal. Episode 7, Beyond the Aquila Rift, Adapting Existential Horror. This episode is based on a short story by Alastair Reynolds, a former astrophysicist whose fiction often dwells in the uncanny intersections between space, memory, and loss. The adaptation by Unit Image, one of France's top CGI studios, pushed the envelope of photorealistic animation to the edge of the uncanny valley. Reynolds' original story ends with more ambiguity. The show's version doubles down on visual trauma, making Greta's spider form a literal Lovecraftian horror, her kindness laced with unknowable motives. Early concept art revealed an even more grotesque version of the alien nest, which was toned down to balance empathy with terror. It's no coincidence that Greta's human form is designed to evoke warmth, only to reinforce the psychological devastation of truth. Episode 8, Good Hunting, From Ken Liu's Page to Cyberpunk Rebellion. Adapted from Ken Liu's critically acclaimed short story, this episode was animated by Red Dog Culture House, a Korean studio known for its fluid, hand-drawn aesthetic. Liu's story is a blend of Chinese folklore and post-colonial critique, but the animated version goes further, transforming the Huli Jing into a symbol of bodily autonomy and gender violence. Originally, Liu's narrative stops short of full mechanical transformation. The showrunners chose to extend it, turning Yen into a steampunk avenger. According to early interviews, this decision was made to give Yen more narrative agency in the visual medium. The brutal surgery scene was reportedly almost cut for fear it would overshadow the episode's empowerment arc, but Liu himself approved its inclusion, citing its necessity in confronting historical trauma. Episode 9, The Dump, grotesque satire on a budget. Though often dismissed as comic relief, The Dump was a personal project for director Javier Riccio Gracia. Inspired by both WALL-E and 1980s trash horror, like The Toxic Avenger, the short was meant to be disgustingly charming. Created under tight budget constraints, the episode used a modified clay-like rendering pipeline to give Otto, part dog, part trash golem, a tactile sense of physicality. Its dark humor masks a real anxiety. That disposability of objects, places, and people is baked into urban development. The original script ended with the inspector escaping, but the team opted for poetic justice instead. Otto devours gentrification itself. Episode 10, Shapeshifters, War as Allegory for Otherness. Based on Marco Cluse's short story, this episode was animated by Blur Studio, founded by Tim Miller himself. The idea of werewolf soldiers emerged from Cluse's exploration of augmented bodies in broken systems, a theme also central to his Frontline's military sci-fi novels. Behind the hypermasculine violence lies a critique of military ethno-nationalism. The werewolves represent any soldier who is useful but not welcome: immigrants, queer bodies, people of color. Early drafts of the episode had Deckard dying in the final fight, but Fincher reportedly pushed for a loner ending, one where survival doesn't mean redemption, only exile. At first glance, Beyond the Aquila Rift dazzles with its near-photorealistic CGI. But the real brilliance of its animation isn't the detail, it's the deception. The mise-en scene is too perfect. The lighting on Greta's face is always soft, almost romantic, and the color palette leans into warm amber tones, even in deep space. There are no flickering lights, no entropy. Everything is symmetrical, slow, gentle. It's not realism, it's memory, fantasy, comfort. And that's the clue. The station's interiors are subtly off, too clean, too static. When Tom walks, there's a noticeable delay in the ambient noise, as if the environment is rendering in real time based on what he expects. These glitches accumulate until Susie's awakening. Her terrified outburst shatters the illusion, and for the first time, the camera shakes. When Tom finally demands the truth, the shift is violent. Colors desaturate, shadows elongate, and the fluid motion of Greta's movements are replaced by uncanny stillness. Her transformation into the spider creature isn't just body horror, it's a breakdown of visual language. The illusion collapses frame by frame, like a corrupted video file. What we're watching is not a reveal, it's a deconstruction of how cinema itself manufactures empathy. We fall in love with Greta because the camera tells us to. But when the same face, same voice emerges from a monstrous body, we are forced to confront our own complicity in believing what we want to believe. Liang may start as the protagonist of Good Hunting, but by the midpoint, the story belongs to Yen, and the episode knows it. The shift is subtle but deliberate. In the first act, Liang occupies the center of the frame, usually shot from slightly below eye level, suggesting the classic coming-of-age arc. But after his father's death and Yan's mutilation, the perspective changes. Yan is filmed from low angles, moving across the screen with increasing agency, while Liang retreats to the role of observer. When Yan receives her mechanical body, the camera lingers not on the machinery, but on her face. There's no awe, no celebration, only purpose. The frame tightens, the color grading cools, and her body becomes a weaponized silhouette against the industrial skyline. Even the sound design reinforces this narrative reversal. Early in the episode, Yan's footsteps are light, fox-like. Post-transformation, each step lands with a metallic pulse that echoes like a war drum. What's brilliant here is the reversal of the cyborg victim trope. Yan is not the tragic figure rescued by a man. She is the story's evolution, a hybrid born of violence and reclamation. Liang's arc ends where hers begins. Each of these episodes is rich with symbolic detail, often hiding in plain sight. In The Dump, Otto the trash creature is more than a monster. His first appearance is preceded by the sound of a dog's whimper, and when he attacks, his body mimics canine movement. He's not a beast, he's grief made flesh. A mutated memory of something once loved, now disfigured by abandonment. The Dump isn't just a location, it's a graveyard of meaning, where Dave chooses to live inside the decay rather than be sterilized by the new. In Shapeshifters, full moons are never shown, but they are always implied. The transformation scenes take place in harsh desert daylight or electric-lit military bases, where the absence of moonlight is itself a symbol. These werewolves don't need cosmic permission to change. They are always hunted, always animalized, even when wearing the uniform of Empire. The use of religious iconography is subtle but deliberate. In Deckard's final fight, the enemy werewolf wears a rosary, not around his neck, but wrapped around his wrist like a shackle. Faith here is not a source of salvation, but an accessory to brutality. It's a war of bodies where belief is worn but not lived. Beyond the Aquila Rift is often praised for its shocking twist, but the genius lies not in what happens, but in how time itself becomes a prison. The episode's timeline is a recursive loop. Tom doesn't just awaken into a lie, he awakens into the same lie, over and over. We are not told this explicitly, but the dialogue gives it away. "You've asked this before," Greta says quietly. "You always ask to see the truth." This is not a one-time trap. It's a simulation running iterations, reloading emotional sequences like a sadistic video game. Unlike typical twist endings, which collapse the narrative into revelation, Aquila Rift uses the twist to fracture our understanding of continuity. Greta doesn't lie out of malice. She lies because she knows the truth will destroy him. And Tom, upon waking, always chooses to forget. The structure mimics trauma response: confront, deny, re-narrate. This recursion is reinforced by direction. The same camera angles reappear with slight differences, like glitching memories. Greta's smile never changes. The lighting never shifts. The station is not decaying, you are. The story becomes a meditation on memory as incarceration. Each time we relive it, we get no closer to escape. That's not sci-fi. That's psychological realism disguised as horror. Ken Liu's original short story Good Hunting ends with quiet resignation. In the prose, Yen never becomes a mechanical avenger. Instead, her transformation is spiritual, symbolic of cultural assimilation, not literal vengeance. But the Netflix adaptation makes a bold choice. It externalizes her trauma into a new body. In doing so, it shifts the story from literary melancholy to kinetic revolution. The decision was divisive. Critics like TOR.com celebrated the animated version as a feminist reclamation of agency through technology. Others, like LARB, argued that turning a subtle allegory into a revenge fantasy flattens Liu's original ambiguity and recenters Western ideas of power. So who's right? The truth is, both versions serve different purposes. Liu's prose mourns the fading of old magic under colonialism. The animation, in contrast, retools that loss into resistance. It's a cinematic act of speculative revisionism. The difference lies in medium ethics. Prose can linger in grief. Animation demands momentum. Where the short story ends in silence, the film explodes in gears and metal claws. The character of Liang, too, shifts meaning. On the page, he's complicit. On screen, he becomes a builder, a quiet metaphor for the diasporic craftsman, unable to save the past, but able to remake it. Among fans and critics, The Dump is the most divisive of the four. IMDb lists it with a lowest score, 6.3/10. On Reddit threads, it's often labeled as filler or irrelevant. But this surface dismissal misses the episode's deeper function. The Dump is satire in the key of body horror. Its grotesque textures, absurd pacing, and morally ambiguous protagonist all nod toward the tradition of EC comics, tales where monsters are karmic enforcers and filth conceals justice. Academic critics like Dr. Andrea would have argued that trash in the episode isn't just literal waste, it's social cast-offs, the elderly, the poor, the unclean. Dave doesn't protect garbage, he protects a way of life that modernity wants to erase. Otto, the monster, becomes a reverse bulldozer. Instead of flattening homes, he swallows the institutions that try to displace them. Ironically, the episode's juvenile humor, Dave playing fetch with a human arm, obscures its thematic weight. It weaponizes bad taste to challenge aesthetic elitism. What if The Dump is the last place where a man can live outside the algorithm? Shapeshifters has stirred debate for its portrayal of the werewolf as a persecuted other. Some critics hail it as an allegory of queerness or racial marginalization in the military. Others argue that it appropriates these themes without the depth to fully engage with them. Let's consider the evidence. Decker and Sobieski are elite soldiers, but they are caged, monitored, called animals by their commanding officers. Their strength is respected, but their existence is not. The episode mirrors real-world dynamics where institutions weaponize marginalized identities for utility but refuse them dignity. However, the episode stops short of political specificity. It doesn't name the prejudice, only implies it. This has led some to claim it's cowardly, using allegory to hint at injustice while avoiding its consequences. But perhaps that's the point. The werewolves have no tribe, no flag, no rights. They exist between, neither fully accepted nor fully free. Decker walking into the desert isn't just exile. It's the only honest ending for a creature that society cannot absorb without breaking him. His howl isn't a roar of power. It's a farewell to the idea that institutions can be redeemed. In these 4 episodes of Love, Death, and Robots, what initially seem like isolated personal stories, an astronaut trapped in a hallucination, a fox spirit stripped of her power, a man defending his junkyard, a werewolf turning his back on the military, are actually structural tragedies. These aren't just character arcs. They are the fallout zones of systems that have failed, erased, or consumed the people within them. In Beyond the Aquila Rift, the web-like alien hive isn't just a creature. It's a metaphor for the final form of techno-utopianism. What begins as a leap toward exploration ends in a prison of comfort. The hive traps Tom in a simulation, but it's not coercion, it's sedation. And that's what makes it terrifying. He doesn't resist because the illusion is too kind, too close to the memories he clings to. It mirrors how we willingly surrender to algorithmic bubbles, not because we're ignorant, but because reality, raw, unfiltered, is often unbearable. The lie is gentler than the truth. In Good Hunting, the fusion of magic and steam isn't fantasy, it's colonization. Yen doesn't lose her shape-shifting because she's weak, but because the world that gave her power, its land, its language, its culture, has been paved over by industrial empires. The British governor doesn't just mutilate her body, he rewrites it. Her transformation into a mechanical predator isn't an act of liberation. It's a forced adaptation to a system that refuses to acknowledge her humanity unless she weaponizes it. The dump might be the most absurd on the surface, but it's also the most literal in its critique. Otto, the trash creature, isn't evil. He's a reaction, a grotesque embodiment of everything society has cast aside, the poor, the old, the inconvenient. Dave isn't defending a dump. He's defending the last space where people aren't required to conform to urban optimization. When the city sends someone to clean it up, it's not about sanitation. It's about displacement. Otto doesn't attack out of rage. He defends because that's the only thing left he can do. In Shapeshifters, the military doesn't just use Decker and Sobieski. They commodify them. The werewolf soldiers are stronger, faster, more loyal, and still treated like animals. The military welcomes their power, but not their presence. They're seen as tactical assets, not brothers in arms. And when they're no longer useful, the system has no space for them. The enemy doesn't defeat Sobieski. The institution's dehumanization does. Decker's final act, walking into the wild, isn't defiance. It's resignation. There's no place left for him in the world he fought to protect. None of these characters truly make choices. They react to the narrow corridors they've been forced into. Tom doesn't choose to return to the illusion he has no one left. Yen doesn't become a machine because she wants to. She has no other way to survive. Dave doesn't win, he becomes part of the thing he was trying to protect. Decker doesn't walk away as a hero, he walks away because that's the only thing the system left him. Each of these stories reflects what happens when people are reduced to roles, functions, or exceptions. They're not protagonists, they're collateral. Their agency isn't narrative-driven. It's systemic fallout. And maybe that's the most disturbing thing about these episodes. They don't ask, what would you do? They ask, what choice would you have if the system already decided who you're allowed to be? Tom could be any of us scrolling through an algorithmic feed, choosing comfort over clarity. Yen is every person who's had to rebuild themselves from trauma, not because they were brave, but because no one else would. Dave is every outsider who learned to love decay because it was the only place left. Decker is anyone who gave everything to an institution, only to be told, in the end, they were never really part of it. These episodes aren't nightmares. They're mirrors. And the reflections they show aren't monstrous. They're familiar. Audience responses to these 4 episodes reveal something more than artistic taste. They expose fault lines in how we process trauma, difference, and power. While Beyond the Aquila Rift and Good Hunting garner near-universal praise, The Dump and Shapeshifters sparked sharply polarized reactions. The divide wasn't just over animation style or pacing, it was over ideology. Beyond the Aquila Rift haunted viewers with its devastating final frame. But some critics argued that its emotional impact relies on a manipulative premise, that comfort is more dangerous than fear. The alien doesn't torment Tom, it sedates him. That blurred ethical line between care and control is what makes the story so divisive. Is Greta's entity a monster or a mercy? Is letting someone die in peace, albeit in a lie, a form of compassion or a violation of consent? The episode refuses to answer, forcing the audience to wrestle with the same question. When do we stop seeking the truth because it costs too much? Good Hunting drew acclaim for its fusion of folklore and feminism, but was not without its critics. Some questioned whether turning a victim of sexual violence into a cyborg avenger bordered on exploitation. Others saw it as the very definition of narrative justice. Yen doesn't just survive, she adapts, evolves, and reclaims her power. The ethical tension lies in the body, who controls it, who rebuilds it, and whether the reclamation of agency through technology is liberating or another form of colonization. The episode never moralizes. It just builds the machine and lets us decide what it's for. The Dump, by contrast, was treated by many as throwaway comic relief. But beneath its grotesque humor is a serious question. Who gets to decide what's worth preserving? Ugly Dave and Otto live in a space that the city has written off as obsolete. The inspector, an avatar of modern urbanism, treats Dave not as a resident, but as a stain to be removed. The moment Otto consumes him is both cathartic and disturbing. There's satisfaction, but no justice. What makes The Dump so uncomfortable isn't its messiness, it's its implication that survival, in a world of forced order, requires becoming monstrous. Then there's Shapeshifters. For some, it was a powerful allegory about the treatment of marginalized soldiers, especially veterans whose trauma or identity sets them apart from the institutions they served. For others, it was problematic. Its use of lycanthropy as metaphor felt too vague, too comfortable in its ambiguity. Was it about racial otherness? Queerness? PTSD? By refusing to commit, the episode opened itself to critique from all sides. But perhaps that was intentional. The werewolf metaphor here isn't clean because being othered never is. Decker isn't radicalized, he's exhausted. His final decision to leave isn't triumphant. It's quietly devastating. The system used him, feared him, and finally discarded him. His howl isn't a call to arms, it's an elegy. Across all four stories, power functions not through brute force, but through soft erasure, replacing memory with illusion, replacing magic with machinery, replacing people with policy. What each episode asks in its own way is, who decides what, and who gets erased? And more critically, who gets to grieve that loss? If Tom wants to believe the lie, does that make it ethical to keep him there? If Yan's new body allows her to fight back, is it still her body, or someone else's weapon? If Dave and Otto kill to preserve their home, are they resisting or regressing? If Decker walks away from humanity, does that make him free, or finally fully alone? These aren't hypotheticals. They're ethical riddles written in pixels and fur. And audiences respond differently depending on which part of themselves they see reflected, the survivor, the outcast, the silent witness, or the unacknowledged casualty. These episodes don't offer closure. They don't let us walk away clean. Instead, they linger, unresolved, unanswered, but undeniable. That's not just good storytelling. That's accountability. What makes these episodes truly unsettling is not what happens in them, but how close they are to what's already happening. Each story isn't just speculative fiction. It's a cautionary tale dressed in animation, an early warning disguised as myth. Beyond the Aquila Rift presents a scenario that feels extreme, a man unknowingly trapped in a simulation by a compassionate alien. But swap out the alien for a social media algorithm, and the scenario is disturbingly familiar. We already live in echo chambers designed to comfort, distract, and retain us. The Greta illusion isn't science fiction. It's curated content, filtered news feeds, and AI-generated personalities that adapt to our emotional needs. The idea that people might prefer the lie to the truth isn't cynical anymore. It's observable behavior. The episode forces us to ask, if technology can offer a world where our pain is hidden and our memories are curated, will we still choose reality, especially when it hurts more? Or will we opt into the simulation, fully aware it's not real, simply because it's easier to bear? Good Hunting predicts a world where the natural and the mystical are not defeated, but reconstructed, mechanized, industrialized, and monetized. In our current age of body augmentation, AI-enhanced identities, and transhumanist dreams, Yan's transformation feels less like science fiction and more like a metaphor for how bodies, especially female, racialized, and marginalized bodies, are controlled, re-engineered, and weaponized in service of systems they never asked to be part of. This isn't just a story about colonialism. It's a story about how power survives through adaptation. Old gods are not killed. They are updated, coded, and uploaded into systems that reflect the values of those in charge. What's terrifying isn't that Yen becomes a mechanical fox. It's that it's the only way she can survive. The story doesn't end with liberation. It ends with optimization. In The Dump, the idea that waste is alive, growing, adapting, feeding, isn't far from the truth. Landfills today are not dead spaces. They are ecosystems of rot and resilience, filled with bacteria, methane, and evidence of human excess. But more importantly, the metaphor extends to social systems. People deemed useless are discarded, invisible, and unwanted, not because they are dangerous, but because they are reminders of what society wants to forget. Dave's resistance is not political. It's existential. His choice to live among garbage is an indictment of a world that demands constant purification, sterilization, and control. His victory, if we can call it that, is hollow. He survives, but only by becoming part of the rot. This speaks to a growing phenomenon: survival at the margins in decaying systems, outside of legality, beyond gentrified narratives of progress. Shapeshifters may seem fantastical, but its core message, about soldiers being used and discarded, is painfully grounded. Today, many veterans return from war to systems that abandon them. Mental health services underfunded, physical injuries undersupported, identity crises ignored. If those veterans are also queer, trans, immigrants, or people of color, the exclusion is magnified. Decker's transformation isn't just physical. It's symbolic of the price of being other in a system that only values sameness. The military uses him because he is efficient, not because he is understood. And when he asserts his difference, he is called a threat. This mirrors the broader pattern of how institutions commodify difference until it becomes inconvenient, then punish it. The question these episodes raise is simple but urgent. If the future they depict is already arriving, who do we become in response? Do we build stronger illusions to hide behind? Do we turn trauma into tools, even if it deforms us? Do we embrace decay as sanctuary? Do we walk away from systems that never saw us as fully human? These aren't hypothetical. They're adaptive strategies we see every day in marginalized communities, activist circles, underground cultures, and disenfranchised populations. These episodes map the survival blueprints already in motion. And yet, for all their bleakness, the stories also suggest something deeper. That resistance, even when fragmented and painful, still exists. Tom may be trapped, but he keeps asking for the truth. Yen may be altered, but she still hunts on her own terms. Dave may be isolated, but he refuses erasure. Decker may be alone, but he reclaims his name in a world that tried to rewrite it. These are not tales of triumph, but they are tales of endurance. And in a world increasingly defined by systems we didn't choose, that endurance, fierce, fragile, flawed, may be the most powerful story we have left to tell. The cultural aftershocks of these episodes extend far beyond the screen. For many viewers, they've become more than stories. They've become reference points for how we talk about identity, agency, and survival in a broken world. You can find fragments of their imagery in fan art, their philosophies echoed in think pieces, and their symbols, especially the mechanical fox or the solitary werewolf, repurposed in everything from social media avatars to protest metaphors. Online, the term Aquila Rift syndrome has quietly emerged in comment sections and discussion threads. It's not an official diagnosis, but a cultural shorthand for the phenomenon of choosing illusion over painful awareness. People use it to describe everything from denial about climate change to the psychological dissonance of working in a system that harms others for your survival. That's not just a meme. That's a form of collective processing. Likewise, Yan's transformation in Good Hunting has been adopted in trans and post-human communities as a symbol of reclamation. Fan edits and AMVs reframe her final scene, not as vengeance, but as affirmation, a body remade on its own terms, even if forged from trauma. There are academic papers already surfacing around shapeshifters and its engagement with narratives of sanctioned monstrosity. Military studies programs have cited the episode in discussions of identity friction among marginalized veterans. Even The Dump, despite its apparent simplicity, has inspired urban policy critique in design schools, a visual parable about what modern cities label as unworthy of preservation. For viewers who want to continue this exploration beyond the series, here are a few curated recommendations. Films and series that expand these themes. Paprika, 2006. Deezer, Satoshi Kon. A dream-reality boundary collapse that echoes the simulated softness of Beyond the Aquila Rift, but with surreal energy and psychological depth. It asks, if your unconscious could edit your world, would you ever want to wake up? District 9, 2009. Deejar Neil Blomkamp. A raw, genre-bending critique of xenophobia, using body transformation as allegory for social rejection, just like shapeshifters. Gritty, grotesque, and politically razor-sharp. Ex Machina, 2014. D-Jar, Alex Garland. For fans of Good Hunting's questions about control, embodiment, and the ethics of artificiality. It's not about whether machines are human, it's about what humans do when they can build others. Come and see 1985. D-Jar, Elam Klimov. Though it's a live-action war film, it resonates with the emotional core of Shapeshifters. What happens when innocence is chewed up by systems of violence? Harrowing yet necessary. Books that deepen the philosophy. The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. A novel where dreams reshape reality, often in ways the dreamer can't control. Offers a literary counterpoint to Beyond the Aquila Rift's ethics of constructed comfort. Post-Human Bodies, edition Judith Halberstam and Ira Livingston. A foundational academic anthology that explores how bodies are reimagined through trauma, technology, and cultural demand, perfectly aligned with Good Hunting's deeper implications. The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. While nonfiction, it provides a clear analysis of how systems exploit crisis to re-engineer societies, a framework that helps contextualize the institutional violence depicted in all 4 episodes. The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin explores freedom, alienation, and ethical compromise in utopian versus capitalist worlds. Useful for unpacking Shapeshifter's final question: can you ever belong to a world that only values you when you obey? The cultural relevance of these 4 stories doesn't just come from their aesthetics or plots, it comes from how they give us new language. Language to describe the feeling of knowing the truth and still choosing the dream. Language to articulate what it means to rebuild yourself without consent. Language to understand how decay, exile, and otherness aren't failures, but sometimes survival modes. As we increasingly navigate augmented realities, identity politics, bioengineering, and institutional breakdowns, these shorts aren't just entertainment. They're emotional flash drives, compact, potent, and impossible to erase once downloaded. In Beyond the Aquila Rift, Tom looks at Greta and whispers, "How much of this is real?" Her answer, calm, almost loving, is enough. That one word isn't just for Tom. It's for us. We ask these stories for meaning, for resolution, for truth, and they give us just enough. Enough to unsettle. Enough to illuminate. Enough to leave us haunted. But if we dared to rewrite their endings, what then? What if Greta had told Tom the truth from the beginning? Would he have survived the knowledge or died of despair? What if Yen never rebuilt her body and chose exile over vengeance? Would her story still feel like justice? What if Dave surrendered and let the city take the dump? Would Otto have withered into silence or raged into the open world? What if Decker had stayed in the military, burying his howl, saluting a flag that only half saw him? Would that have made him more human or less? These questions don't change the stories, but they challenge the frameworks we use to interpret them. They remind us that fiction, at its best, doesn't answer the question, it sharpens it. And maybe that's what this strange little quadrant of love, death, and robots does best. It doesn't moralize. It doesn't offer solutions. It simply points to the glitch in the system, the crack in the wall, the hesitation in the hero's voice, and says, look closer. If you saw yourself in any of these characters, even for a moment, ask yourself, which part? Were you the one who stayed asleep? The one who rebuilt to survive? The one who chose the rot over the cleanse? The one who walked away from a world that never truly saw you? And if you were none of them, are you sure? Now it's your turn to respond. Drop a single emoji in the comments that captures how you felt watching these episodes. Let's see which story stayed with you the longest, and why.